So then we are back with a more understanding from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find in a layer of understanding of the spring feast, autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. Precisely then on Yeshayahu the 61st chapter, where then we are evaluating then the timeline from the time of the Messiah, born then 4999, at the end of 4998, 4999, we find then the birth of the Messiah, 4999, and then from his birth, then his kingship then started. So then the calculation is very simple. Not only we can find his 1,000 years of rulership, then we find Ahashatan's 1,000 years of the seat, ended in 2010. Obviously, started in 2010, then we find the restoration period. However, there are some tiny discrepancies regarding then the Gregorian calendar versus then the Hebrew calendar, where then we find ourselves then understanding and making those references and those matching of dates. So then we find then precisely when the Messiah then was born. 4999, he was placed on a pole 5032, and then he spent 2 Yom creation days with the Samaritans, where then 2,000 years later makes us then 7032. That's where we are at the moment as far as the end of the prophecy. And then the existing year is 71T. With this in mind, then we find ourselves after then 2009 or then 2010, then we find ourselves then understanding the time of the restoration period. However, we find then what the Messiah has said. We should study the instructions or the scriptures, make sure we should not be ignorant of the times and the seasons. As Shaliach Shaul has said, these datings are obviously times and the seasons where then Shaliach Shaul mentioned we should not be ignorant of. But then, from the Greco-Roman translation, they are so confusing, and they've used religion rather than facts and layers of understanding, and then there are sections of the world absolutely ignorant of the times and the seasons spoken of by Shaliach Shaul. These then, however, can be taught very precisely. So then we find ourselves then evaluating these instructions and then understanding where our government is at. Obviously, governments are scoundrels by nature. Ever since the holy cities then were gone, then after 1009 we find then governments always screwing up every time, because governments are selfish by nature. Let's understand then a bit of this from the last G20. It was an absolute fiasco. It was absolutely ridiculous. It was, in quote, hijacked and was obviously sabotaged by the Americans because they are simply a lazy country. They don't know how to revitalize their industry without pushing arms. So then the president then of the United States went to the G20 as a salesman, tried to get rid of arms. He's not interested in Syria. He's not interested in those children being dead because of sarin poison. He wants to get arms sold so then he can continue with his supremacy in a time where the holy instructions does simply not let. The set of instructions, they do not let, or they can't let these extension for very long. In fact, when we read chapter 11 of Daniel, the despised ones, in fact, is the United States. When we read then from the Israelic lineage, in the 21st verse of the 11th chapter of Daniel, you find the despised one is United States, because they don't understand the times and the seasons. And so many times Shaliach Shaul said we should not be ignorant of, because then we would have our understanding obviously related with the limits of the times and the seasons. He's speaking of limits of time. At the moment, 2010 and beyond until 7032, this age must be closed. As such, we must then evaluate what the Messiah has said. So then, since we know precisely then the ending of the prophecy, then makes it easier for us then to backtrack rather than trying to find from forward motion. We can do a reverse motion from 7032, making it a whole lot easier. So then, is it important studying the half a time and then half and time and a half and those many times that Daniel has said? It is important studying those. Very important. However, most importantly is for us to understand the end of the prophecy, 7032. It's extremely important. Because from it, then we make a reference of what the Messiah has said regarding the time of the end, found in Matthew the 24th chapter. Then the Messiah said it would have a reduction of time. If it wasn't for the reduction of time, then the chosen people would not stand. This means there is a reduction, obviously, from 7032. Where then we don't know precisely when the autumn feast is going to take place, as we don't know when then the autumn feast starts, because in a day and a time that no person knows, but they have to wait then for the first sliver of the lunar view, and then this particular day when it's shown then becomes a high Shabbat, thus then starting then the period. This then obviously shows us how important it is for us to understand the times and the seasons. At the moment, Yom Teruah is starting then at the sundown today. Then we find Yom Teruah. Then in the mid-month, then we celebrate the birth of the Messiah, because it's obviously then the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, or Sukkah. Thus the birth of the Messiah has nothing to do with 25th of December. 25th of December obviously was a date where then those pagan nations, they were already celebrating many of their own practices, but since the Greco-Romans, they were ignorant of the times and the seasons, then they decided to incorporate also the birth of the Messiah in the midst of their own religions. But the Messiah does not belong in the 25th of the 12th month. He belongs in a Tishri, and that is September. So then, since we understand the Messiah's birth is then in the mid-Tishri, this specific month from then the regular calendar, or the pagan calendar, it is in the 22nd of September. That's then the time when the Messiah was born, then in 4999. So then, with this in mind, we study the Holy Instructions, and let's then understand the lack of serious steps regarding the G20. It was absolutely pitiful. It was a waste of time. Then, prior of the G20, there was on the internet very specific guidelines what they should be speaking of. In no portion of any time was then sections of it related with the war. So then if they decide to talk of war during the time of the meals, they should have posted these on the internet, because the nations were expecting these countries to talk of the economy of the world. But instead it was hijacked by the United States trying to push arms. It was absolutely ridiculous. Not only this, but then the nations, rather than asking Mr. Xi, the very person, the very nation related with the 10th chapter of Daniel, precisely the center focus of the 10th chapter, making a prelude for the 11th chapter, is the very nation making directives for the 11th chapter of Daniel. And those countries of the BRICS, rather than being smart and requesting Dragon Mart in their countries, they ended up talking of war. War is destruction. What period of time are we at? Reconstruction. Restoration. Why were they speaking of war? Because they were ignorant. Thus, Shaliach Shaul has said, in terms of the times and the seasons, you should not be ignorant of. And the leaders were ignorant. They should have requested dragon mark in their countries. So then, we in Brazil are obviously served with incompetence of our government. The president was there. She could have talked with Mr. Xi, requested then dragon mark for our country, and she simply was quiet, didn't say a word, going with the flow, because either if they do a nice job or not, they get paid the same. If this was then a situation of they have to make deals or no pay, then we would have results. Since isn't, then we got junk. So the G20 was then a joke. So then, we have to rely ourselves not on the G20 anymore, but on instructions itself. Let's understand why. Because this set of instructions, we find then obviously a section related with the merchants of the earth. So let's understand where the authority is going towards. As the leaders, they are proving themselves incompetent. They don't understand the importance of generation of jobs. The economy, they don't care. Then we find ourselves understanding the importance of the merchants of the earth. Because when the merchants, they don't do their job, they don't get paid. So then, let's understand from the 11th chapter of Daniel a few transitions. But let's name some of them that are very important. We've gone through at least one transition where then we've changed our views and understandings related with the times and the seasons spoken of by Shaliach Shaul. The ending of the 1,000 years of the seat ended in 2009 or 7009. Thus, 7010 or 2010 then started the time of the restoration period. So Nahashatan has changed his facet from deceit to precision, from devil to dragon. That's what he did. And he remains dragon until the autumn feast starts. Then he changes to destroyer. So when you read the 20th chapter of Galah or Revelation, then you understand the many facets of Nahashatan. It's not only mere names in the same thing. Those were the stupidity of the Greco and the Romans. They did not understand the distinction, because they are abstract people. They don't understand then the five senses must be then used regarding the holy instructions, the real instructions. So then, let's understand further. Not only this, but then at the end of 21.5, then the sharing of taxes amongst the nations of the BRICS. This, however, shows us a very important point. Many videos previously it was explained. There is a system of the Chinese coming. How do we know this absolutely for sure? Because the 10th chapter of Daniel is specific for the country of China. So then you find then Daniel fasting. And we can imagine how important the topic is. Daniel the prophet saw, after then the legs of iron, then would have a time of iron and clay where the nations would be divided. But even though there are divisions, then in a statue where iron does not mix with the clay must have an organizing point, so then the world can obviously be directed to the end until the autumn feast. These, however, is found obviously on the 20 and further. The 21st speaks of a very important point. Speaks of the understanding of the exactor. There is China. The previous chapter is then mostly related with the southern kingdom, Africa. Though we find then the exactor later in the 20th chapter and the 21st, in understanding of it, previously you find then China first leading the way, and then you find south, the Kingdom of the South. It's none other than DRC, Democratic Republic of Congo, where then the President Kabila is the very center of it. Not only this, but he is the most important person of Africa related with the trade. He is the most important, because technology depends upon coltan. Coltan is used in computers. So if you are a person, you are so religious, but you don't understand then trade and the aspects of the holy instructions related in the times and the seasons, you won't ever understand the prophecies. Thus, the only situation left is religion. And religion then goes so far, because the stupidity of this country, Brazil, for instance, being in the presence of this very important person from China, where then Daniel makes this reference, yet not asking for the Dragon Mart as becoming then the distribution center, it is absolutely stupid. Thus then, you find the leaders making a mockery. The G20 was a mockery. We thought we would observe and understand then a reunion very important, where then leaders would truly work through their problems regarding trade only, because those were the topics of the objectives. And we find ourselves then finding junk. Thus, politics can't play with it. Thus, the next step are the merchants of the earth. Those are must, and they will to receive the authority spoken of by the Messiah himself. Because then the Ishmaelites must receive the authority of trade later via crude. They will to control the flow of the trade via crude. They will to have their say. So then, with this in mind, then we study the southern kingdom. Yirmiyahu the prophet, chapter 1:8, gives us then the very understanding of the time of the restoration period, then tabernacling on the land of Cush, and then woe to the place beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, simply Congo, because it's mixed up with the violent ones. Not because of themselves they want to be violent, it's because they had a deal with Israel many centuries ago, during the time of Shimon. And it was very stable relationship. When Shimon then broke, then they became violent, because the relationship was broken. So then the restoration of the entire country and the restoration of the entire continent depends upon tabernacle on the land of Cush, because this tabernacle is going to rescue the relationship of Jerusalem during the old times of Shimon, and then is going to restore the entire continent of Africa as far as a relationship they used to have, because we are speaking of the restoration. As far as trade is a direct consequence of the harmony coming from tabernacling, obviously. If there is no tabernacling, there is no harmony. That's why then the world is absolutely in a disastrous way. And rather than doing the work that they should have, then the Americans again making mockery out of the system. But then it doesn't stop there. Next year in May then opens the Dragon Mart of the Chinese then on Mexico. And then the people are going to go into Mexico to get their products, because most of the products of USA anyway comes from China. The only advantage is they can get the same products on Mexico for up to 5 times cheaper. You know what this is going to cause? An increase of the value of the USD to make up for it. So then the countries using USD are screwed, including Brazil, because it's absolutely 100% dependent upon the USD, because Brazil is ignorant. And the president of Brazil, after this G20 pitiful event, has shown the incompetence. So then there is no solution other than wait until next year in May, because the politics and the politicians, they don't care. They get paid the same. If the Brazilians would be strong enough and then would obviously demand from them, if they do not make deals during the event, they don't get paid. Believe for sure they would have done it. But because Brazil is a wishy-washy country, depending upon the USD, with it or not, they don't care, because they are ignorant. Then comes the president back and doesn't care. So let's wait until next year, until the situation becomes grave, and then evaluate what should be done. Until then, let's make sure other nations in the south won't have Dragon Mart for themselves. Because there won't be two Dragon Marts. There is only one of them in the South Atlantic. Should have only one of them. One of them in the South Pacific. And then the country is related with the BRICS. It's obvious. But they prefer mockery. In many countries, the economies are already bad. They are having protests everywhere. And they come together, and rather than being serious, then they do the same mockery, but they're expecting another result. You know what this means? Stupidity and being crazy. It means insanity. Politicians doing the same thing and expecting another result is insanity. So then, we find ourselves then even further studying the Holy Instructions, because then we understand the freighters of the earth, they are coming. So then, as far as the United States, we understand FedEx, UPS, and the other freighters, they have to bear the burden of the problems of the country. And they already know it. Because China is the leader. Though then, unfortunately, they did not understand Daniel the 10th chapter, because the Greco and the Romans, when they translated, they scoundrelized the chapter. So then, the previous scripture you read in the 10th chapter of Daniel, the 21st verse, there was the Greco country there. But it's not the Greco country. It is the Eastern Kingdom, China. So then layers up with Daniel chapter 13, where then Bel and the dragon then plays as a spiritual level. So then you find China very important. The 11th chapter shows then the kingdom of the east, China, kingdom of the south, then Africa, and kingdom of the north is then the Soviet Union. So then, with this in mind, we understand what's coming very closely. Since then, they decided of sharing of taxes to get tax evaders, they're going to share their taxes, the information, obviously. With this, we come a step further when we then spoke of regarding then purchases via the virtual system. The only way of charging taxes is via the labeling of the freighters, was it not? Thus then, when a person is making a purchase via the yen virtual in the very near future, then instant taxes must be gathered, wasn't it? Thus then, the G20 has then revealed they want sharing of taxes. Thus the system is further coming. With this in mind, obviously then, comes the main computer that US will come up with shortly. Because they are becoming aware of they are behind schedule. Not only a nation that is failing, they are the despised ones of 11th chapter of Daniel in verse 21. It's the despised ones. Those are then related with the United States. Because it's a country absolutely devoid of understanding of times and the seasons, trying to extend itself further from what they were then given. With this, then, we find ourselves furthering reading and understanding the instructions. So then, the freighters shortly after, there is then a section of the understanding of the trade where then next year in May opens Dragon Mart in Mexico. Thus the USD is going to be further devalued. Thus the compensation is rising the price to make up for the lost. Then in October of next year opens up the second Panama Canal. Then regarding United States, 27 months from today, then the USD will be broken. They won't be able to maintain the costs. Thus, the United States is on a path of becoming the despised ones. And then later you understand the situation regarding U.S. and Israel and the covenant. So then, with this in mind, let's understand then the consequences of not doing trade properly. China is the center focus of the fasting of Daniel in the 10th chapter. Then you find China again in the 11th chapter, and the relationship of Congo, and then China, and then the Northern Kingdom later. Then you find the Socialist Party of the 60s regarding Cuba also being implemented with it. So the 11th chapter is replete with understandings in the times and the seasons, extremely precise in every aspect, other than the taka note made by people that were ignorant. So then we study these even further, because next year in May, Dragon Mart opens. Then we are going to watch before our very eyes the USD going down, until they become the despised ones then of Daniel 11, and then obviously the verse 21st. Please stay tuned, much more coming up.